Hey, welcome everybody to this very special edition I was going to say the Bishop and the Rabbi, but we're going to stretch it a little bit. But we're really happy to welcome all of you here to this interview that promises to be an extraordinary glimpse into what is happening in our generation on the planet, specifically as it involves the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, but really also as it involves the Christian world and the implications of that for the nations of the earth. I'm really happy you're tuning in. I am super excited about our time together. And I think that you're going to be educated, you're going to be inspired, your thought horizons are going to be broadened as we enter into conversation with my good friend, Josh Reinstein, who is joining us from Jerusalem. Josh, it's great to see you.
Hey, Robert, how you doing? Good to see you again.
Well, Josh, you and I go back quite a few years. And, as I was reflecting on this time that we're going to have together, we're going to be discussing your new book that is just coming out. And Josh, I have to tell you, mazel tov to you. This book, Josh, it is really impressive. I'm amazed at the scope and the depth of what you produced in this book. It's a book that has needed to be written, and we're so honored to be able to present it to folks today. The cover is on the screen behind me. It's called Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. We're going to talk about the book in a moment, but the book is really an extension of the journey. Your life and mine have paralleled in a lot of ways. You come from a Jewish background, you live in Jerusalem, and I'm come from an evangelical background, live in the nations. But we have seen this amazing kind of reconnection happening in our lifetime of the global, particularly the evangelical community. There are other aspects as well of Christianity, and we're trying to grow that. But rediscovering the Jewish roots of Christianity, rediscovering a friendship with the Jewish people, and then understanding Israel's right to exist and prosper in her historic boundaries, and all of the implications of that. This is a philosophical discussion, it's a religious discussion, it's a political discussion, it's a human rights discussion. All of these issues swirl around this. But just to give some context, you are and I want to get the title correct, is it Executive Director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus? Is that the title?
Yep, Director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus.
In the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, I was blessed to be invited by you, Josh, to the inaugural meetings of that caucus. An amazing Russian-Israeli a Knesset member, Yuri Stearns of blessed memory, really was a man ahead of his time and saw what was coming with this. And for the first time brought together parliamentarians, political leaders from the nations with an outreach arm in Israel, in the Knesset. And I was involved in all those early meetings. I have the photos from those early meetings. And Josh, you were the one, Yuri Stearns and Benny Alon of blessed memory, they had the concepts, but you really put action to it. And that great Hebrew word tachlis, you're really the one who built the architecture. And so we've been blessed, you and I together, to kind of witness history come alive as there has been this growth. So let's start there. Share with us the background of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and what it does today. And then we'll go from there and talk more about the book.
Well, thank you, Robert. First of all, I'm super excited to hear that you love the book. I was nervous. You were one of the few people that actually know all the background stories that I talk about in the book, know about the beginning, know about the new relationship between Jews and Christians in the 21st century. So I wanted to do it justice, and I'm happy to hear that you say that I'm doing it.
It's the book is exceptional. It is exceptional, and I really, we're going to make it available to all of our partners. It is a must-read book.
Well, I really appreciate that. We started the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus in 2004, and you were at the inaugural meeting together with the Speaker of the Knesset, who's now the President of the Knesset.
Sure.
Sorry, the President of Israel, not the Knesset, Ruby Rivlin.
That's right.
He said famously, and he said famously at that meeting that there are 1 billion Christians in the world and there are 13 million Jews, but together we're 1,013 million. And I tried to capture in the book not just the origin story of the caucus, and when you were there, you're actually in the book, as you probably know from reading it, talking about the important initiatives of Eagle's Wings that we actually adopted and worked on together for the last 16 years. But also, I tried to take back to the beginning of this whole relationship between Jews and Christians, all the way back to the time, even before Jesus, to the time of Titus, when, of course, Titus said he destroyed the Second Temple. He built the Arch of Titus to commemorate his victory over the God of Israel. He said paganism won. He was very excited about this. He made this arch, which is now, you see arches everywhere for victory. The Arch of Triumph in France and other. But it was the first time ever that someone built an arch for a victory in war, where he carried the menorah out of the temple saying, "We won." And really what I try to do in the book is I show that if you don't look at Israel from a biblical point of view, you miss the story. And that's what happened with Titus. He thought he won, but anyone who knows the story of Judeo-Christian values, of our heritage, knows that was the beginning of prophecy. We knew we were going to be kicked out of the land of Israel, but we also knew that we were coming back and we'd be gathered once again in the land of Israel. And that is the first example of when you don't read the Bible, when you don't know the Bible, you miss the story. And of course, you and I know, and that was the basis of the starting of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, that God prophesied that Jews and Christians would come together, that when the Jewish people come back to the land, it will be the Gentiles who carry them back in their arms and on their backs. It will be the Gentiles who lift up.
And carry them back on eagle's wings. Don't forget that.
Yeah, coming back on the eagle's wings, or airplanes as we call them today.
and there's the prophecy in Zechariah chapter 8, I believe it is, verse 11. It says, 10 men from the nations, so 10 Gentiles, will take a hold of one Jew and say to them, "Let us go with you, because we have heard that your God is with you." And this is what we see happening, Josh. All over the world, we see a stream within Christianity that is staying within Christianity. We're not converting to Judaism. We're not forsaking our Christian theology, but we are saying, listen, we are a branch that comes from a root, which is Pauline theology. Romans chapter 11, Paul says, don't forget that you are the wild olive branch. You've been grafted in to the covenant that God made with his friend Abraham. Abraham grew up, lived in Ur of the Chaldees, a land of polytheism, heard the voice of Hashem, and began this journey toward ethical monotheism that we now live in. And so I can't agree with you more. You have to look at history through a biblical lens if you're going to see it accurately.
Well, I think what's interesting about the book is that there are many books written about Israel from a political point of view. And there are also a lot of books written about Israel from a biblical point of view. But I think this is the first time that I've tried to weave the political point of view through a biblical lens. And I show all of Israel through that direction. And of course, by working with you, Robert, you know that if you don't believe in the Bible and you don't believe in the God of Israel, you're probably going to be against the state of Israel. Mm-hmm. And if you do believe in the Bible and you believe in the God of Israel and you believe in the land of Israel, you're going to stand with Israel. And I try to explain why both sides are aligning and why we're seeing this incredible burst of activity between Jews and Christians in the 21st century. Why also there are many forces coming against Judeo-Christian values and Israel at the same time.
Well, and in my last book, No, We Can't, I dealt with this twin threat that is a threat to the Judeo-Christian world, which is on one hand a radicalized jihadist Islam, and on the other hand a militant secularism. And when I released the book I think it was about 8 years ago, everybody scratched their head and said, "Well, what in the militant secularism? What are you talking about? The least militant people in the world are secularists. Secularists are tolerant. secularists are those, who just want, peace and utopia. But wow, are we seeing right now an outburst of a violation of human rights, a violation of basic human decency? I mean, first of all, if you just want to go and look at what's happening in Hong Kong with the totalitarian shutdown of human rights in Hong Kong from the secularist communist Chinese government, then if you want to look at in America, Antifa and these other far left extremist groups that are really attacking the fabric of Judeo-Christian values. And, Josh, what I keep telling people is a person's personal faith, that's between you and God. That's between you and God. That's a sacred conversation that you have or do not have between you and God. But society has to be architected. It has to be bounded by some type of basic presuppositions. And as Americans, and I know you're both an Israeli and a Canadian, you're not I don't know if
I grew up in Dallas.
but aren't you Canadian originally?
I'm Canadian. I was born in Canada, but I moved to Dallas when I was a year and a half old. So
okay,
go Cowboys.
I don't know. You're the man of a dozen passports. But the Constitution says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And so if we can't reference God, whether that's to you a personal God or a deist view of God that Thomas Jefferson may have had, but still is a call out to a higher power, a higher standard, we begin the slippery slope toward mankind being the measure of all things. And if we're going to look at Stalin and Pol Pot and look at history, Hitler, of where humanism ends when God exits the picture, it is a very, very difficult and violent picture indeed.
It's interesting because I wrote the book in January. And I talk about this alliance between radical Islam, between extreme atheists, between people who believe in replacement theology too, mainline churches.
Right.
And I predict that in America, we're going to see the type of riots that we're seeing today. I even said that it's going to end with Bible burnings, which you see today on the streets. And there was a rabbi that I sent the book to that I'm close with in Dallas, and he said, what are you, a prophet? I said, no, I recognized at the beginning where this was heading. And it really happened during September 11th. I saw an interview on news with Jerry Falwell of blessed memory. And the interviewer said to him, he said, what do you think's happening? And he says, people who believe in God, people who have Judeo-Christian values are under attack by people who don't. And the interviewer was very, very confused. He said, what are you talking about? You think that this is an attack by radical Islam? You think that this is a clash of civilizations between people who believe in the Bible and people who don't? And Jerry Falwell said, yeah, that's exactly what I think. Mm-hmm. And that really shook me. And I realized that Israel is proof that the Bible is true. You can't pretend that the Bible is some storybook as long as there's Israel. We, in the first 5 minutes of this podcast, talked about 5 different prophecies that were basically fulfilled right in front of our eyes. There are dozens and dozens of them. You can't say that there's no Bible if Israel's around. So people who are against the Bible are going to be against Israel.
One of the favorite things that I saw in the book, because I love this, you talk about the prophecy where young children will once again be playing in the streets of Jerusalem. And I think that's also Zechariah. It might be chapter 7. But it says that there'll come a time where the elderly will be walking with their canes, and the young children will be playing in the streets of Jerusalem. Just take us to that snippet in the book, because I love walking groups through and reminding them what was the old city of Jerusalem like under Jordanian occupation. What were the religious rights of Christians, of Jews, of other minorities when Islam dominated the area, and what is it like today? Bring us to that prophecy for a moment.
Well, look, I spent a lot of time in the book going through the prophecies to explain how they're being fulfilled in modern times through real things that are happening. And the children playing in the streets of Jerusalem is really an incredible miracle. And people say, oh, how could that be a miracle? Children play in my street too. But people have to understand that before 1967, Jerusalem was a dangerous, desolate place. No one went to Jerusalem. The king of Jordan, who occupied Jerusalem from 1948 to 1967, he never even went there. And so the fact now that children can play in the streets and that there's no crime and that a 12-year-old girl could go downtown Jerusalem at midnight by herself and be safe. It's really shocking. You would think that they're, from the news, that it's dangerous and we're under attack, and it's not. It's literally the most peaceful capital on the planet. And that's what people don't understand. But I also go into prophecies. I wrote this book not just for a Christian audience, which I hope will enjoy it and use it, but also for a Jewish audience. Because Jewish people say to me, what is Christians' role in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy? Well, you just have to open up the book of Ezekiel when it says that when the Jewish people come back to their land, they'll be like dreamers. And then the nations will say, wow, God, look what God has done for you. And then only then will you say, look what God has done for us. You see, it's the nations that understand that God is fulfilling his prophecies in Israel. Only now Jewish people are beginning to understand that and not look at it through a political lens all the time. Because really, if you don't look at it through the Bible, you miss it. And in the book, Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, I try to set that foundation before going into all the political aspects and, how's the relationship work and how do you stand with Israel today and what did Trump do because of Christian support? I try to really lay a strong foundation of where this comes from in the Bible and how people like me and you 15 years ago knew what was going to happen today.
Now, Josh, let me push back on this for a few minutes, because what do we say to the folks who say, listen, that, fine, you can have a belief in the Bible, that's your business. But how does your belief in the Bible or your view that these are the fulfillment of prophetic promises, how does that justify what some view as occupation of Palestinian land or colonialism extended, there in the Holy Land? What do you say to folks who say, listen, the Bible's fine for you as a book of faith, but don't use your Bible as a political roadmap that infringes on others' human rights?
Well, I think that in the book, I go into the political rights, the legal rights, the historic rights, the archaeological rights to the land of Israel. So anyone can pick from those as well. But all of them pale in comparison to our biblical rights. The Bible is our deed to the land. It's not a storybook, the Bible. We bought that land. No people have a claim to a land more than the Jewish people to Israel. No people have ever had their capital in Jerusalem other than the Jewish people. So if you want to ignore history and make up what's going on today, you can. But if you look at the Bible, it's very clear who the land belongs to and for how long. Now, that being said, I spent a great deal of time going into the legal rights of the land, the historic rights of the land as well, and where this land came from. So I believe that the biblical claims is the most important. But I give everyone the tools to make the argument on the political, the archaeological, the historical fields as well, because you can't just rely on one and not the other. We have to be able to explain what's happening today through our biblical beliefs. Benny Alon, who you mentioned before, always used to say, you can't read the newspaper and understand it if you don't read the Bible, because they line up today, and it really does.
Yeah, but I really do appreciate, you went into parts of history that people don't often know about or discuss. You go all the way back to San Remo, which is a very important political, secular watershed moment in the journey of things. And I do think it's very important, especially for Christians, to develop a vocabulary and reference points to understand, because Josh, I have to tell you something. I have said over and over again, if I was not a Christian, if I did not believe the promises of the Bible, my viewpoint and my stand on Israel would still be the same. Because, as you say, there are a host of other frameworks where Israel's case can be built upon. Historic, archaeological, legal, whether it's San Remo, whether it's the UN vote in November of 47, and Israel's, the constant push for the two-state solution, as though Israel is the impediment to Israel's accepted every two-state solution that's come along and said yes from the beginning. Ben Gurion said yes to what was given and was attacked immediately. You and I were, I think we visited with Ariel Sharon together. I was with Ariel Sharon, I think 3 weeks before the stroke that eventually took his life. He withdrew from Gaza, and immediately Gaza became the new front, and was filled with Hamas and Hezbollah. So
look, I think that like what you're saying is true. Anyone who's educated about what's happening in Israel, if they're not against the Judeo-Christian values, if they're not against the Bible, they're going to stand with Israel. All right. If you're just neutral and you just have the facts, you're going to stand with Israel because it's the only free democracy in the Middle East. If you like freedom and justice and rights for all, then you're going to stand with Israel, regardless of your religion. But the reason people are standing against Israel is because of that virus of anti-Semitism, that virus of hatred towards Judeo-Christian values. And that's spreading all over the world. And for the first time, Christians are a victim of that virus too. It used to be that they just go after the Jews, but evangelicals are now in the same boat we are in. And in some cases, I would say, even worse. And in the book, Titus Trump and the Triumph of Israel, I go into how Christians are the new Jews of today, because it's Christians who are the victims of genocide in Africa, in Middle East, in Asia, not Jews. Right. So we have to understand that it's not just being Jewish that makes us under attack and spreads anti-Semitism. It's clinging to the belief in the one true God and the Bible. And that's why we're under attack. And it doesn't matter if you call yourself an evangelical Christian or a Jewish person, you're going to be under attack by people who hate that. And that's where the hatred comes from.
Mm-hmm. So, Josh, since the launch of the Christian Allies Caucus, and I do want to say, our partnership was vital in the launch of the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem. I think you've attended almost everyone, if not everyone, since we launched the Israel Experience program, bringing young pastors and young college students. We've brought hundreds and hundreds now. You've always reached out your hand in friendship with that. Our Watchmen on the Wall program, the curriculum that's gone now all around the world. You've been a vital link in that, and we've been so grateful. But since the launch, that humble meeting that we had, and I can, in my mind's eye, I'm going around that table and remembering who was there in that inaugural meeting, and there were several meetings after that we were a part of. Now the Christian Allies Caucus has grown globally under your capable leadership. Tell us a little bit, how many caucuses, how many sister caucuses or partner caucuses are there around the world?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the beginning. In the beginning, we were kind of like a vessel. We didn't really have a roadmap. We just knew we needed to bring Jews and Christians together. And you stood up in that first meeting. You're like, hey, this is what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3. And we're like, hey, great. That's the plan. And we went with it. And it's been incredibly successful. And we're very thankful for those initiatives. Since then, we've started sister caucuses in parliaments all over the world. It started in 2006 with the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus in the House of Representatives, and then the Canadian Parliamentary Israel Allies Caucus. Today, we have actually 43 Israel Allies caucuses all over the world. We have 10 in Africa, 10 in Venezuela, 16 in Europe, including the EU, 3 in Asia, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and we have about 1,000 members of parliament in our network. It's all being coordinated. I'm the president of what's called the Israel Allies Foundation. The Israel Allies Foundation coordinates all the activities of our sister caucuses around the world. And we call that faith-based diplomacy. It's the idea of taking your biblical support and turning into real political action.
And it's extraordinary. And you just see the nations beginning to come on this highway to Israel. Now, as we're talking today, of course, we're in the middle of coronavirus, lockdown. So this is driving me nuts. This is the first year since 1994 that it looks like I won't get to Israel. So I'm kind of freaking out a little bit here. But certainly in people's hearts, there is this awakening and this moving forward. Now, Josh, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, but we do try to read trends. There's a lot of unrest in our world. We've got a very difficult election coming up here in America. I can't figure out what's happened in Israel. I think you guys have had an election, and there's like 2 prime ministers now that are Netanyahu's in for this term, and then Gantz is in, but I don't know. That seems to change constantly over there. Are things going to get worse before they get better?
It really depends on the November election. I think that if Bible-believing Christians come out to vote, I think things are going to get a lot better. We're seeing already in the last 3 years, the relationship between the U.S. and America has never been stronger. We have seen more successes in that relationship than ever before. And I can say confidently that Donald Trump is the most pro-Israel president in the history of America. Now, you may disagree with him on other issues, but when it comes to Israel, he's the best. And there's a long line of presidents who are very dear friends of Israel. So that's an incredible statement to say. Our organization, Israel Allies Foundation, made a list of the top 10 things that America could do for Israel in our wildest dreams, with our goal of getting one done in the next 5 years. Donald Trump has done 9 of them in the last 3 years. It's really, any one of them would have been a sea change in policy. He did them so fast that some of them just kind of fell through the cracks even. And so we're actually in a very positive place despite coronavirus. Once coronavirus dissipates, and it will, our economies are actually still doing pretty well, you know, once they get rolling again. Internationally, America is on the scene. Israel just signed a peace deal with the UAE, and there's a lot more coming as well in the Arab world. So things are actually pretty bright, but that can stop in a flash. I mean, just take a look at the idea of re-engaging with Iran and letting them once again develop nuclear weapons with billions of dollars. That changes the whole Middle East in 1 second.
Right.
And that's really the platform right now of the challenger in the presidential elections. So these elections really matter a lot when it comes to Israel. And what I'm concerned is that people are asleep. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about Corona, and they won't come out and vote. So I hope that one of the messages of the book, Titus, Trump and the Triumph of Israel, is that Christians need to get off the sidelines. They need to get involved. They need to go out and vote. They need to get involved with initiatives. They need to show that they're, you know, part of the story, not just watching from the sidelines. So I hope this encourages people to get involved.
Well, I'm telling you, the book, there are a lot of books on Israel that are what I would call inspirational. You know, they will cherry pick a few scriptures, and they're great. They're wonderful books. They're more what I would call devotional or inspirational, etc. The genius of what you've accomplished in this book is, as you referenced earlier, you pivot back and forth between the biblical principles that are a part of our shared tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, but then how that has played out in historic ways, politically, for the good or for the bad, you know, because we see anti-Semitism, we see the BDS movement, we see those who would delegitimize Israel. And, you know, I'm right with you, Josh. To me, the only statement that maybe you've made today that I would perhaps disagree with, and maybe I didn't understand your statement fully, but listen, I know secularists who live in Tel Aviv who don't believe the Bible for whatever reason, but Israel, you can be whatever religion you are, whatever political persuasion you are. There is freedom of the press. There is democratic process. There is protection for minorities. Everything that we would hope for the future of the planet, Israel presses into. Do they do it perfectly? Absolutely not. There is no perfect culture on the planet. There is no perfect society on the planet. But Israel somehow, this tiny nation, manages to allow people to, in Tel Aviv, live as a secularist, and in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem, live as an ultra-Orthodox, and still function together within civil society in an incredible way. I
100% agree with you, Robert. You know, if you're secular and you don't believe in God, but you're not against people who believe in God, you're going to love Israel. Again, we have all the freedoms and traditions that you do. Like, if you're a secular person and you see that we're the only country.
Yeah, and that is the difference between a secularist and a militant secularist.
Exactly.
I'm describing in my book. There's a difference between a secularist and a militant secularist who has set themselves against the core values that come from a Judeo-Christian worldview. And that's the core of what Israel represents. It's not so, you're not trying to impose a belief system or a religious theocracy God forbid, on anyone, but you're trying to say these are the best of human values, and they flow from that Mosaic belief system that we got at Sinai.
Yeah, I mean, I know many atheists, complete atheists, who love Israel because it's the only place that they can go and be free and do what they want. Of course you're going to love Israel. Again, my attention was not to say that you have to believe in the Bible to like Israel. Most people like Israel, even if they have no connection to the Bible. What I'm saying is that the people who don't like Israel are people who are against the Bible, who hate the Bible, who hate the God of Israel. It's that hatred, that anti-Semitism, that anti-biblical values that turns you against an incredible place like Israel. We're the only place where men and women are equal in the whole Middle East. Right. We're the only place where women can show their face in public in most places in the Middle East. We're the only place that has freedom of religion and freedom of democracy. You don't need to believe in the Bible or to be a religious person to enjoy that. Most people want that. They want freedom. But if you hate the Bible, you can't enjoy that either, because you know that the reason the Jewish people are in the land of Israel is because of the God of Israel.
Josh, it's so good. Now, one of the things you deal with in the book, and I recommend everybody get a copy of this. We're going to make this available to all of our Eagles Wings partners. But you talk about the backdrop of the greater Middle East. And I want to talk for a moment about this historic accord that's just been signed between Israel and the UAE. Now, when President-elect Trump called for the embassy to be moved to Jerusalem, and actually seemed like he might do it, I got an email from the New York Times, and the New York Times asked me if I would write an op-ed. They were doing two opposing views. So one, someone wrote opposing moving the embassy, and I wrote in favor of moving the embassy. I think it was in December after the election. I don't know the date, but I wrote in favor of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And I argued in my op-ed in the New York Times that this would be a step toward normalizing relationships in the Middle East, because it would be a step based on fact. It would be a step based on, no matter what happens, Jerusalem is going to remain the capital of the state of Israel, whether there's two states or not, whether there's an East Jerusalem capital or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's not going to change. Let's move the embassy because it's a step out of fantasy into reality. Now, Josh, I was excoriated on the New York Times. I was torn to shreds. You can go today and read the comments. I was a warmonger. I was a crazy end times prophet declaring that, there was going to be, I was torn to shreds. Lo and behold, the embassy was moved. The world did not end. And now, these couple years later, Josh, this peace deal, this normalization of relations between Israel and the Emirates, this is historic. This is as big as Begin and Sadat there with Carter on the White House lawn. And yet the media is not talking about this at all.
Well, I go into this very extensively in the book. There's two worldviews on Israel. There's the Obama administration's worldview that the problem with peace in the Middle East is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the solution is Iran. By emboldening Iran and making them a world leader in the Middle East, we're going to bring peace. And we're going to make sure that Israel gives in enough so that peace will come. Then he got the Trump doctrine. He says, no, the problem with the Middle East is actually Iran. And they're causing all the trouble. By standing with Israel, we're going to embolden Israel, and then other countries will bring peace, and that will bring in peace. Okay, and that was the big fight. That was the whole thing about the Iran deal, why so many were against, so many were for. New York Times, of course, loved the Iran deal. You give them $150 billion, you let them make nukes, we're going to have peace. But of course, if you look at history, it isn't the case. 2 million Muslims, forget Israel, 2 million Muslims were murdered because of what they called the Arab Spring under the Obama administration. Now we're going through an incredible time of peace in the Middle East, not because the fact that Trump is standing strongly with his allies. And what we're seeing is just the beginning of this new relationship. Israel and like you said, the United Emirates, they made peace. But guess what? Bahrain's going to make peace. Oman's going to make peace. Morocco's going to make peace. And then Saudi Arabia's going to make peace. Why? Because people are starting to understand that Israel isn't the problem in the Middle East. Israel's the solution in the Middle East. Israel is how you bring peace. By giving freedoms to your people, you make peace. And so I think that why people are ignoring in the media today, and I go into this in the book very, I think there's a whole chapter just on the difference between the two doctrines. But the reason they're ignoring in the Middle East today is that now finally we have a convincing answer that the Trump doctrine was right all wrong and Obama doctrine is wrong. Unfortunately, the media is really pushing the Obama doctrine on the Middle East for the election because the Democratic Party is going to embrace that doctrine once again. That's what they claim in their platform. So this is just putting a lot of egg on their face. And I believe leading up to the election, there's going to be more peace deals. And I think it's going to be harder and harder for them to ignore.
Well, and for the Eagles Wings partners and those who walk with us, I've walked very closely with the Iranian community here in America. We have regularly participated in a lot of the human rights rallies that our Iranian brothers and sisters are fighting for. And I mean, goodness gracious, if the liberals want to look for a place to be worried about a theocracy, for a place to be worried about extremism, for a place to be worried about a violation of the most basic human rights, it's right there in Iran. And yet you go across America, you're going to have protests against Israel on college campuses, but you're going to have silence when it comes to the greatest threat in the Middle East, which is Iran. And so, guys, this is not unusual throughout history. It takes a while. What did Winston Churchill say?
The farther back you look, the further ahead you can see. That's
it. But he also said something like, false information travels 100 miles before the truth gets out the front door. For whatever reason, it takes a while for facts to catch up. But please, God, may we live in an age where facts and truth move forward. And the fact and truth today is this. If you're a secularist, but you're guided by a principled moral compass, then you celebrate the fact that Israel upholds basic human rights and equality for all in a very difficult neighborhood. Yes, there are problems. Yes, there's difficulties. Guess what? That comes with being human. That's not going to go away anywhere. But Israel as a nation is making a valiant attempt at living the very best of human rights. If you are a believer, then you look at the biblical text and you literally see century by century, decade by decade, and now year by year, and sometimes month by month, the prophecies coming to pass in front of our eyes. And Josh Reinstein, director of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, you and I have been profoundly privileged by God to be present at moments where history literally has taken place. And just so honored by the work that you do. And I want everyone to get a copy of this book. The link is there in the video. And we want you to become educated on the realities of this from a historic perspective, from a prophetic perspective, and from a political perspective. That will be solid footing and solid ground for you to stand on in the midst of all the controversy. So Josh, thank you for joining us from Jerusalem today. It's been an awesome conversation. Any last comments before we sign off?
Yes, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I think the main point is this. This story, our past, our present, and our future has been foretold. And we both take great solace in the fact that there will be peace in Jerusalem. We know there will be. The question is, are we going to go the hard way or the easy way? We have freedom of choice. And we can go the easy way and do what the Bible says we should do, or we can go the hard way and think we know better and try other things to get to that point. And I think that what I try to do in the book is I try to lay out, well, if you do believe in the Bible and you understand that God is fulfilling his prophecy, what do we need to do now? And so I hope this is something that's uplifting to Bible-believing Christians, Bible-believing Jews, and also atheists who want to know, why should they stand with Israel? Because it's something in there for everyone. But I really, really wanted to just echo what I said at the beginning. The fact that you liked it, Robert, means a lot to me, because you were one of the pioneers reaching out to the government of Israel saying, we need to build this alliance. And so you were there every step of the way. And I just want to thank you for the work that Eagle Wings does. It's a tremendous honor to be even a small part in that work. And I really appreciate what so many people like you and the people that follow Eagle's Wings are doing to stand with Israel. And that's why I wrote the book.
Well, it's tremendous, and we can't wait to get it into the hands of all of our partners. And Josh, we need to get this translated into several languages if it hasn't been done yet. And we need to get the word out far and wide. So, Josh, thanks for joining us from Jerusalem. Blessings to you and your beautiful family. And everybody, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.